Hello everybody, this is Steve Walsh, class of 1980, and this is Cardinal Chat. This is the episode for October 29th, 2019. My classmate and friend, Joe F., and I traveled from our hometown, Philadelphia, to visit Wheeling this past weekend. The purpose of our trip was to mainly attend a football game. On Saturday afternoon, the Wheeling Cardinals played the Frostburg State Bulldogs, I think they were. Actually, it was the Bobcats. Anyway, Wheeling was 0-7 at the time, and Frostburg was 6-1 before the game. Anyway, we rented a car, and we left Philadelphia Friday afternoon around 12:30. And arrived in Wheeling at probably about 6:30 or so. We stayed at the Wilson Lodge in the Bird Wing. We were there for 2 nights. When we arrived in Wheeling on Friday evening, it began to rain, and pretty much rained off and on all through the night and all through the next day, probably till late in the afternoon. So, when we attended the football game, which began at 1 p.m., it was raining off and on through most of the game. The night we arrived at Wilson Lodge, there was a lot of people checking in. In fact, we discovered that the Mountain East Conference cross-country championships, both men's and women's, were going to be held the following morning. So there was cross-country athletes from all the schools in the conference checking in that night. In fact, that evening, while we were checking in, we spoke to some of the runners from, Concord University, who were checking in at the same time, and we informed them that we were in town to watch the Wheeling University football team play, and they mentioned to us that their team had not played Wheeling yet, and they were also 0-7 at the time. So, according to Wheeling's schedule, they will be playing at Concord on November 16th, beginning at 12 p.m. So, this might be a chance for the Wheeling Cards to win one game this year. Right now, they have 3 left at Glenville State on the 2nd. West Virginia State at home on November 9th, and then they finish up with Concord, as I mentioned earlier, on November 16th at Concord. So Joe and I pretty much stayed in that evening, watched the Major League Baseball World Series. However, we got up early the next morning, around 7 o'clock. We had breakfast in one of the hotel restaurants, a buffet breakfast. And we headed out and drove around the park a little bit. Took a little tour of Ogilvy Park. Then we drove down to Wheeling, around Wheeling campus to take a look at some of our old college haunts. While driving around, we happened to come upon a class of 1981 alum, Paul Renwitz, who played basketball and is in Wheeling University's Athletic Hall of Fame. Paul happens to live right across the street from the school. So on our tour of the old neighborhood, Joe and I, of course, drove by Ye Old Alpha bar/restaurant, where we spent many hours having good meals while our time at Wheeling College. Also, we went and took pictures of the Book and Donovan pharmacy, which is no longer there. And then we just drove around Wheeling a little bit, went down to downtown Wheeling, Market Street, just to get a look at what's going on. While we were driving around, it was a late Saturday morning, and there weren't many people in downtown Wheeling, which we both noted upon. So after a short bit downtown, Joe and I returned to the campus to get to the game. We arrived at the gate around 12 o'clock-ish, and so it was $10 per car to get into the game. So we went into the game, and there weren't many people there at the time. In fact, Wheeling, the attendance numbers that Wheeling submitted for the game said 697 attendees, but we're not quite sure that there were actually that many there. There was a women's volleyball game going on at the same time in the McDonough gym. And from what we understand, a couple of the other teams were playing away. And of course, Wheeling runners were participating in the Mountain East Conference Cross Country Championship. Joe and I looked at the results of the cross country championship the day afterwards, and the Wheeling Cardinals had 5 men, and they all ran fairly well. In fact, the team finished 6th in the conference out of 10, and the women's team did even better. Anyway, there's not many runners on the cross country team as compared to some of the other colleges and universities in the Mountain East Conference. So while waiting for the game to start, Joe and I went down to the main building to see if the bookstore was open up, to see if we could buy some Wheeling University paraphernalia. However, the bookstore was closed, but we were told that they sold hats and shirts inside the Rathskeller / coffee shop. So I went in and got a cup of coffee, and Joe and I each got Cardinal baseball caps with the red and yellow Cardinal on it. The price, they cost about $17 a piece, and the coffee, by the way, was $3.75. So we went back to the game shortly before it began and settled in the stadium. We sat on the Wheeling Cards side, of course. As I mentioned earlier, there weren't a lot of fans there. So after a beautiful rendition of the Star Spangled Banner done by a Wheeling University student, the game began. First thing we noticed about the two teams is that Frostburg State had a lot more players on their squad. In fact, someone mentioned they had 99 players on their squad. Wheeling has 50 or something on their team. But of course, this is their first season, and most of the players are freshmen and sophomores. Joining us at the game yesterday was another classmate, Mark Roy, and his wife, Mary Ellen. They drove in from Pittsburgh to watch the game with us. Joe, Mark, Mary Ellen, and I had an enjoyable time watching the game and talking about the good old days. And the Wheeling Cardinals football team managed to stay in the game for a little bit, even though Frostburg State was a more dominating team. In fact, Wheeling took the lead 6-0, missed the extra point. Frostburg came back and scored twice to make it 14-6. Wheeling scored again to make it 14-12, went for a 2-point conversion and missed that. So it was 14-12. And then, for the halftime, Frostburg State scored again to make it 21-12. So Wheeling went into the locker room at halftime, losing only 21-12. In the second half, Wheeling had some opportunities to make the game closer, but all their drives stalled, either to not being able to get first downs or interceptions. And one of the highlights of the day was that Wheeling's running game came alive a little bit more. prior to this game, the Cardinals had only been averaging about 48 yards per game on the ground. But this game, their lead runner got 99 yards for the day, and another running back got about 56 yards. So their running game was decent for the day. The passing game was usually what it is, but problem was that the quarterback threw too many interceptions, and in fact, Frostburg State turned the 4 turnovers into 28 points. So this is one of the main reasons that the Cardinals wind up losing the game 42-12. In fact, the 4 of us left the game when there was still about a minute or so to go, and we missed the fact that Frostburg State had intercepted and run back the interception for a touchdown for the final score. So after the game, the 4 of us went over to Ye Old Alpha Pub, and we sat at the bar and had a beer, and then got a table in the dining room and ordered all kinds of appetizers and different entrees. And in fact, there was so much food that we couldn't eat it all. So after dinner, we said goodbye, and Joe and I went back to Wilson Lodge again for the evening. By the time we got back, there was another event going on. It was a bunch of, looked like high school students who were having like a winter dance. They were all dressed up in, like as if it was a prom. So there was all of that going on. And also all of the athletes from all the universities that participated in the cross-country championships were still there. So the lodge was busy that evening. So Joe and I, we settled in again and watched the World Series again. Went to bed early and woke up again on Sunday morning at 7 a.m. Packed up and decided to just get on the road and get some breakfast later on down on the highway. But the ironic thing is that just as we were leaving Ogilvy Park, the sun started to come out nice and bright, pushing its way through the clouds. And so we decided to drive down to the campus one more time. And on our way there, we came upon Paul Renowitz again, who was leaving out to go visit his mother over in East Wheeling. So we told him about our day the day before. And so he mentioned to us that if we come out again next year, that we should give him a call ahead of time and have a little get-together in the back of his house. He has a nice garden out behind his house. Grows a lot of fruits and vegetables out there. So he mentioned that, we could have a barbecue or something. So the 4 of us that were there on Saturday made plans to do it again next year. Hopefully the school still will be around next year, and we'll come down and try to make a day of it. Get some more of our classmates, other people to come down and bring some old Wheeling College spirit back to Wheeling University. Anyway, I'm running out of time. Thank you for listening to this podcast of Cardinal Chat. Of course, we'll be doing more podcasts in the future in regards to Wheeling University. I've been advised maybe next time I should talk a little bit about all the financial issues that the college is currently going through. But anyway, take care and talk to you next time. Bye-bye.